Welcome to Your Sleep Coach, the podcast dedicated to helping you reclaim your nights so you can live your best days. I'm your host, Devin Burke, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and the founder of Sleep Science Academy. I help exhausted insomniacs fall asleep, stay asleep, wake up energized using proven science-backed strategies and holistic coaching methods. So whether you're tired of tossing and turning or looking to optimize your rest for better health, you are in the right place. So each episode, we're going to dive into expert insights, practical tips, and real-life success stories to help you sleep deeply to live fully. No pills, no gimmicks, just the tools you need to create the sleep you deserve. So get ready to say goodbye to sleepless nights and hello to more peaceful, powerful, and present you. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Your Sleep Coach podcast. In today's episode, we are joined by my good friend, Dr. Josef Wit-Doerring, who is a board-certified psychiatrist and a leading expert in psychiatric drug side effects and withdrawal. He is the CEO and medical director of the Taper Clinic, where he oversees all aspects of patient care, supervises clinical staff, and develops individualized taping protocols, and also works with patients directly who are experiencing complex withdrawal symptoms. In this powerful episode, we unpack one of the most misunderstood topics in sleep health: how to safely come off sleeping medication. If you've ever felt stuck relying on sleeping aids or medications, or wonder why it feels so hard to stop, this conversation will open your eyes to both the psychological and physiological dependencies that can develop, and more importantly, how do you break free from them? Dr. Wit-Doerring shares both from his clinical insight and personal experience on the dangers of long-term sedative use, why many people develop increased anxiety and intrusive thoughts over time, and how the quick fix mentality around sleep often leads to deeper sleep struggles. You're going to learn why tapering must be done slowly and carefully, how liquid formulations can help with precise dosing, and why avoiding substances like caffeine, nicotine, and cannabis is essential during withdrawal. Most importantly, we explore how to create a supportive environment, how to connect and listen to your body, and address the root cause of poor sleep. The good news here is with the right approach, you can successfully taper off sleeping medication and reclaim your natural restorative sleep. So let's dive in this episode. I hope you enjoy it. I know you will. Dr. Wit-Doerring, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, to share with us all about tapering and coming off sleeping medication. So many of our clients at Sleep Science Academy, so many people out there are on sleeping medications. They want to come off. They're confused about how. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of confusion, and you're a voice in the world that is giving people direction, giving people real information on how to taper safely. So welcome to the show. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I've been looking forward to this for several months, actually. I know you've been on the road. So let's dive right into it. A lot of people, they're thinking about coming off a medication. They want to come, but they're still dependent on it. Why do you think people get stuck in the cycle of relying on sleeping medications? Like, what do you see from your practice, from your clinical experience?
I can talk about it from clinical experience, but also personal experience as someone who used to take Xanax to sleep. I think personal is a little bit more crunchy, so I'm going to start there. So,
Perfect.
back when I was coming out of my residency, I joined the FDA, and I was this is a big shift because I was trained in clinical care, and all of a sudden I'm writing reports and having to understand clinical trials. My daughter had just been born, and there were problems at home. There was also, a lot more responsibility at work, and almost learning a whole new discipline of clinical sciences research. And I was just pounding caffeine and chewing tobacco at the time, like 3-4 cups of coffee a day, sometimes Diet Cokes, and then also, like 5 or 6 in pouches. And that was just because I was working a lot. I was doing the clinical trial stuff, but I was also moonlighting on the weekend to make some extra money. And then there was like a lot of stress at home because um, one of the things about medical education is you move around a lot. And so I had also just moved cities. My wife wasn't really near her family. She wasn't really near her friends. I'm working a whole bunch. She's looking after a kid. She doesn't have any support. Just a pretty classic kind of, you know, story for most, traveling corporate people. And, um, and my sleep was deteriorating. I think because I was on too many stimulants. I'd also be getting in. I'd be exhausted at the end of the day, and my wife would want to talk, and I'd be dismissive. And then, we'd get in an argument right before bed, and then I would, just days and days of like not sleeping, and then waking up in the morning and having high, demands at work, and just feeling like I wasn't performing. It's just like a really, really nasty cycle. And then a friend gives you Xanax, and then you take one night, and it just quiets everything, and you just sleep, and you sleep 6 hours, 7 hours, and it's just like, oh my god, this is great. And then you have an argument one night, and you're just like, okay, we got to stop. I have to go to sleep, and you take a Xanax, and instead of sitting in bed for 90 minutes all revved up and pissed off at each other, you just drift off. You wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, as would often happen to me when I was drinking too much caffeine, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with this feeling like there's no way I'm ever going to go back to bed. Almost like this surge of adrenaline inside of me. Instead of getting up out of bed, kind of calming myself down, doing other things, just pop a Xanax, straight back to bed. And so I think the lure of sleeping medications is it's a quick fix to complicated problems. And it's something that you can just, you take it and it works. And they work really well, especially if you're taking something hardcore like a benzo.
Mm.
And it feels good. If you're in an anxious state, that also feels good. And there's a lot of security in that. Um, but it only feels good until it doesn't. And that's and that's kind of also what happened to me. It went from using one, maybe one day a week when I'm like, oh no, I just really need to take it because tomorrow's a big day, and I have this, I don't know, presentation. But then you start making excuses with yourself and just like, well, I actually need it this day as well and this day as well, and then before you know it, you're taking it every single day. That's really easy. And then sometimes they can make you worse. And now this isn't for everyone, but I know this is true for me, and it's true for a lot of the patients that I help come off these meds. When you start taking sedatives, especially benzos long term, you start to become more anxious, and you start to get kind of sometimes obsessive thoughts, sometimes intrusive thoughts, and you can even become agoraphobic as well, where you just become more withdrawn. And that's essentially just the long-term effects of being on sedatives. I mean, our brains really aren't designed to be on drugs that are impacting our GABA system nonstop. And eventually that's what happened to me. I started to have intrusive thoughts, obsessive thoughts. I'd be sitting there trying to work, and, just dark thoughts or, shameful or embarrassing things that had happened in the past, or things, I wasn't proud about, pop into my mind. And it's like this, just a total energy bomb when you're trying to work to be reminded about awful things. And thankfully, I realized that the medication was causing this because I studied the side effects, and I decided, I was able to come off at that time. I also made a lot of lifestyle changes around my use of stimulants, which this isn't for everyone, but for me in particular, it was a really big deal. And coming off stimulants helped in a major way. um, you know, Eventually I addressed my wife's needs, and we stayed in a place more than a year, and we got better support. The relationship improved, and with all of those things, just natural sleep ended up ensuing. And um, I think, like, yeah, I'm going to just reiterate, yeah, the reason people get stuck on these medications is because, yeah, they're a quick and instantaneous fix to often very complicated, serious problems people are having.
I really appreciate that insight, because I feel like, yeah, I'm 100% in agreement. And what we see at Sleep Science Academy is the exact same thing. And I'm curious, from your perspective, is there a time and a place for some of these medications, I mean, one of the things that we teach is, I don't like to vilify things, and I think that there's a time and a place for certain things, but I'm curious what from your perspective, obviously you have a completely different training and background and perspective on this. Is there a place for sleeping medication? And if there is, what types of medications do you think are the better ones for people to consider if you think there is a place for them?
So, there's no like, I'm going to say like GABA deficiency or something like that. Okay, so let's like just put aside things like, I don't know, narcolepsy or like genuine like sleeping problems that are, brain based. And
Yeah.
let's talk about the 99% of people who are having sleep problems simply because of insomnia, learned anxiety about sleep or poor lifestyle situations with, whether it's food, diet, exercise, all of that, physical health. So I'd liken it to like taking painkillers for medication. So for an injury that you have, I mean, it's symptomatic only, and so there's always going to be an underlying cause for it. And I think if you look at it in that way, most people will intuitively say, well, if I'm having ongoing sleep problems and they're there for a reason, I should probably address the underlying cause for it. Because sweeping it under the rug with a medication is not a good strategy to addressing something. Masking underlying issues with a drug it's not going to work in the long term. And you don't need to be a scientist to understand this. Your grandma could tell you, and I think most people, common sense would say, yeah, that's probably not a good strategy. And the reason why it's even more concerning with taking sedative medications is two things. There's two issues that make long-term use of sedatives even more problematic. And the first one is tolerance. When you take a drug that's interferes with your GABA system, or maybe it's like a trazodone and it's interfering with your serotonergic system, or maybe mirtazapine, Remeron, and it's causing problems with alpha two or histamine. These aren't like magic bullets that just hit the parts of your brain that deal with sleepiness or sedation. They disrupt your neurochemical processes that are controlling the physiology of your body. And so when you do that, it disrupts your GI system, your cardiovascular system, your immune system. Some of these drugs even make people gain weight. And so over time, the body doesn't like that, and it sends signals back up to the brain to push down to downregulate the receptors, and so you also decrease the production of certain um, of these chemicals like serotonin, melatonin, all of that, and that's called tolerance. The body wants to push back to get you back into a state of homeostasis, and so the effects of the drug actually become less over time, and so you end up chasing that effect with higher and higher doses, um, pushing your physiology more and more out of whack. And many people who take these drugs long term, and I've given these drugs to thousands of people, and now I've taken hundreds of people off of them. They all eventually say the same thing. I don't really know what this drug is doing anymore, or it's like only working 10%. It used to work like 100%. Now it's only working 10%. And now they're dealing with all of the hassles of having to get medications, get them from their doctors treating them like drug addicts if they run out early or they lose the medications, and all of the really annoying, frustrating parts with minimal benefit. So that's one issue. It's just that you kind of end up just digging yourself deeper into a hole, and sometimes people end up on two or three different sedative medications as well. Like it can get out of hand really quickly chasing that effect. Um, and the other issue is something that I just touched on briefly. In my own story, is that I actually think these drugs make people worse sometimes. Now, this isn't everyone, but it's in a big group of people. I think especially the benzodiazepines, much more than things like trazodone, but benzodiazepines, Z drugs like Ambien and Sonata, I think they can make people more anxious during the day, And I also think, yeah, they can cause obsessive thoughts for some people, and then also agoraphobia. And so now you've taken someone who just had like a sleeping problem, probably for totally legitimate reasons, in their life, and now you've given them like an anxiety disorder on top of that, and now they want to get on a medication to treat the side effects of that med. And so that can also be a very nasty kind of prescribing cascade. And I see that a lot as well. Now, coming back to the original question, now that we sort of know kind of the outline of what this looks like long term, when can these drugs be used? If you're using it for less than a month, I think there's no real issues there. You say, let's say someone, I mean, you fly somewhere, you want to take it on a plane. That's okay if you want to do that. But as soon as or maybe there's a job loss or a death in the family or something like that, and if you need to take a small course of benzodiazepines for a month or so, that's not going to be a real issue to come off. You're not going to develop too much tolerance. It's not going to lead to all of these psychiatric consequences. If you, if you just have it on hand and you actually have the discipline to just take one, I don't know, maybe once a month or something like that, and it's just, just a peace of mind of having it, I don't think that's an issue either. But really, I've landed in the place where I don't actually think, unless you have like a serious, like diagnosed brain illness, like narcolepsy or one of these things like that, which I'm not even that familiar with, and I still worry about the problems with the long term treatment of those. I would say I would say avoid them. I actually think they make people worse in the long run. Is my conclusion.
I really appreciate that perspective. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think, obviously they're meant to be used short term, but for all of the reasons that you just mentioned, people end up using them way longer than they're even meant to be used. And there's a great website, Just the Inserts. Are you familiar with that website, Just the Inserts? I mean,
No,
it- oh,
actually,
this is
what's that?
yeah. So I believe she's still around. She definitely someone probably to connect with. She essentially publishes the inserts of the side effects of medications. And I learned about her many years ago. And one of the interesting things she had this post on Ambien and on just the inserts. And a side effect of Ambien is insomnia. It's so crazy to me. And like the side effect of some of these medications are the very thing that you're getting prescribed them for. So it doesn't really make sense. And I think it's such a slippery slope for people that start these medications. If you're not getting the proper support, if you're not addressing the real reasons why you're suffering from sleeplessness, then it just becomes this cascade. I've seen people that have been on, I'm not kidding you, 6 different medications over the course of like at one time, and they've been struggling for decades. And
Mhm.
it's in your personal experience, was that what inspired you to start the taper clinic? Was it your own experience of, having the benzo like what was it that really you connected with that you're like, you know what, this isn't the way. Like there's a better way and this isn't it. I'd love for you to share that story with the listeners.
It's very similar to what we've been talking about, but broader. And I mean, if you treat anxiety as just as a symptom that has very legitimate underlying causes, it's the same for all of the other psychiatric conditions. Well, most of them. So let's say depression and anxiety, I would consider them very similar to insomnia. And so what I noticed when I went through my training, and I came to psychiatry very much someone who was interested in psychology, philosophy, and self help. And so that was my leaning, and I was hoping that as a psychiatrist, I would be like a quarterback. I would be meeting people, understanding their problems. I'd say, okay, we're having some relational issues. Let's go meet with the relational specialist. Okay, there's clearly some issues with lack of meaning. We need to talk about that. Maybe we need to get you with a career coach. oh, look at this, you're not moving your body, we're having some serious problems with your diet. We need to improve your medical health because obviously you feel like sluggish and lethargic and anxious because your diet is terrible. Like, and so I thought I would be sort of quarterbacking people to help them engage in these root cause interventions for their problems, and then we would use drugs for everything else that we couldn't fix. Um, and that's not what I saw at all when I entered psychiatry. And I actually saw that we would meet with people in 20-minute visits. Instead of understanding the complexity of their lives, we would diagnose them off checklists. And then we would then essentially just give them medications. And it really sort of threw me when I first entered the field because I was like, well, maybe this is the right way to go. And this is just efficient healthcare and it's the way things are done. And I talked to my professors and they'd say, well, depression and anxiety, it's a chemical imbalance. And yes, all of those other things, those non-drug approaches, they can help. But really, we need to pull out the big guns because this is far more than just problems in people's lives. These are brain illnesses. And I said, okay, well, let me have a look at that. I ended up, researching it and finding out that there's never actually been any signs of these chemical imbalances before. And we've looked into all of that. There's no differences in the amount of serotonin in the brains of people who are anxious and depressed and normal people. And and then when I sort of push on this, they say, well, maybe one day we'll find something. And it's a useful analogy to tell patients, and it reduces the stigma they feel about taking medications because we're telling them it's a medical problem, and people feel more comfortable treating medical problems like like a diabetic who has to take insulin. There's no shame in that. And so it's kind of like this white lie we tell people because people feel like they're failures if you just say, hey, your life is out of order and this and that. And then I was just like, this is crazy. Essentially, this is just like lying to people under the guise of trying to be compassionate. And, a long story short, I end up finding out that there's a whole bunch of sinister motives behind that narrative, which end up being commercial and driven by the pharmaceutical industry to kind of present things in a certain way. And it seemed really problematic, very unethical to just say, oh yeah, well, one day we'll find the cause, and until then we'll just say it's this. And so I decided I wanted to become an expert in the psychiatric clinical trial research because I just felt so confused as to how we were practicing, and that it felt intuitively wrong, but everyone seemed to be okay with it. And so I ended up going to the pharmaceutical industry and then also to the FDA, and I look at the evidence basis supporting these drugs, and then I find out that we're practicing so far outside of what the evidence supports. One, there's no chemical imbalance, and so okay, we're essentially just using drug effects from these drugs to mask problems. Okay, maybe I'm okay with that. I'm not morally, but some people would just say, who cares? Better living through science. Like, let's go. But then I saw that we didn't study any of these drugs longer than a year. And I was just like, this is crazy. We're treating people with antidepressants. Up to 15% of our population in the US now take them on a daily basis.
Wow.
And when we look at the clinical trials, none of them have gone longer than a year. And 70% of people taking antidepressants have been on them for 2 years or longer. And so I'm like, okay, so we don't really know if they're safe and effective for long-term use because they're not studied that long. And then when I was just looking back at my clinical practice, I was like, the same thing was happening with the antidepressants as the sedatives. You'd put someone on them, 6 months later, the effect wore off. You'd have to put them on a higher dose. 2 years later, they're maxed out on the medication. They say, oh, well, I don't really know what it's doing, or it's only marginally effective. And then you'd either park someone on the drug there, it's not really doing much. They're now dependent on it and their life is inconvenienced by taking it. Or you go down the prescription cascade where now you stack on another drug and you go through the whole cycle again until they're maxed out on that one. And then you stack on another drug. And before you know it, you got someone on 5 or 6 different medications who's not functioning that well. And I'm just like, this is so clearly, a poor long-term strategy for helping people. Why not just invest the time to understand their problems and help them? Um, I mean, we don't do that essentially. Just a brief aside, because of our insurance system, it incentivizes shorter visits, and so doctors don't do them, which is awful. Because you essentially make more money seeing 4 people in 1 hour than you do seeing one person in an hour, and really taking the time and going through all of the messiness to understand their lives and motivate them and enact behavioral changes, because most people don't want to do that. And so that's a much more time intensive, gritty work, which just isn't compensated. So we just use the drugs. Um,
And
and and
that's
so
part of the training, right? I mean, that's not, I mean, even in medical school, they're not training doctors or psychiatrists to do that type of work, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
yes, yeah, absolutely. So and I think people would probably be frightened to hear that, because you'd think, oh, wow, you're a psychiatrist. You're running the mental health team. You're meant to be the practitioner who's maybe has his hands in all the pies and knows a little bit about everything, because wouldn't you need to know that to effectively run these teams and be the top dog in the mental health landscape? Our and this is something I thought about for a really long time. I was just like, why don't we learn more non-drug therapies, lifestyle approaches, and things like that, to at least be aware of them and have them stressed, like, hey, these really are great treatments with huge effect sizes, and no side effects like the drugs, and we should use them whenever we get the chance. But we don't, M they weren't even mentioned in our training, or if they were mentioned as like a very brief aside, maybe once or twice, with no real emphasis on them. And you end up going through school thinking, well, this mustn't be real medicine because there's no emphasis on it. And if this stuff really mattered and was really important, it would have been prioritized. Now, looking back on it now, having gone through medical school and the FDA and the pharmaceutical industry, and have been in academia, what happens is the people that run the medical schools almost always are obsessed with drugs. Now, one of the ways that you can ascend to the top of Harvard or Stanford or any of these institutions is by having a really kind of top-notch CV with lots of publications, being a recognized leader in your field. You speak at conferences and things like that. And the best way to do that is to work for the pharmaceutical industry. If you start running their clinical trials, they give you support and administrative staff, you get lots of publications, they fly you around the world. And so you have this weird effect now that there's this careerism going on, where the doctors who are pro drug and work with the pharmaceutical industry end up ascending to the top of academia, and they end up training all of the doctors. So they have very pro drug views. They impact the curriculum. And they're not necessarily the best doctors. I mean, really, they're not the best doctors at all. In fact, I think they're pretty bad doctors. I think they're doctors who have a very narrow, drug centered approach to helping people. They're just there because they play nice with the pharmaceutical industry. They're not there because they know the most or they get the best results with patients.
Hmm.
And that's something that most young medical students and the public miss. They just go, oh, a professor at Harvard, this guy knows more than everyone else and he's really hot on drugs. This must mean they're better than everything else. No, there's a different reason there. Um, and I know that's kind of a longer answer, Devin, but that's what's
No,
going on. Yeah.
that's, I feel like, honestly, as you're talking, I feel like what you're doing, it's like the Wizard of Oz. We're peeling back the curtain and really seeing how this whole structure has been built. And I really want to just acknowledge and appreciate you for doing the work that you've done to be able to see that and clearly communicate that in a way that people can understand. Because I think
Mhm.
most people, what you just shared, people just do not know. They're completely ignorant to what you just shared. And it is so important to know that information. I mean, that is crucial. And that was kind of seeing behind the curtain, seeing the whole structure of how this medical system was set up, the pharmaceuticals. That was the inspiration to say, hey, no,
Oh
there's
yeah,
got to be a better
yeah.
way.
Yeah, I got sidetracked, and so there was just
It's a
one
good
more piece
sidetrack.
to this. There's one more piece to this story. So while I'm at the FDA and I'm really focusing on side effects, I also have a little private practice on the side, and I learn about a condition called protracted withdrawal. And this is something that most people have never heard of before. But there's like websites online like Surviving Antidepressants and Benzo Buddies, which they're essentially online communities filled with hundreds of thousands of people who were talking about the difficulties coming off psychiatric medication, extreme difficulties, things that I'd never heard of before, because most doctors, and myself included, were trained that coming off psychiatric medications, the withdrawal is usually mild and it goes away in about 2 weeks. And this also has like a whole nother very dark story about how there was a big scandal in the 90s and then the 2000s about withdrawal issues. And Eli Lilly, the manufacturer of Prozac, essentially the biggest SSRI of our time, commissioned a board of these, quote unquote, independent academics who were just running drug trials to put out a position paper saying that withdrawal was mild. They then gave it to all of their sales reps who went out and talked at conferences and gave it to doctors. And so that was essentially like the message. And that's what I learned, withdrawal from these medications, mild and it goes away. Now, at the same time, I'm now learning that there's these communities online, hundreds of thousands of people having difficulty coming off. It obviously isn't matching up. And so I start studying them and talking to them and treating them in my practice and talking to other researchers in this space. And what I discover is that there is a small but sizable group of people that when they come off these medications too quickly, it's almost like they have a concussion. So there's something about severe withdrawal symptoms that can be almost like you've taken a hit to the head. And the way I would describe it is like this. So you'd have someone who comes off a medication, the doctor pulls them off in 2 months, which to me is very fast. And then they go into very severe withdrawal. And then they say, I'm just going to white knuckle it and hang on. I know this is going to go away. I just want to rip the Band-Aid off and I'm going to be better in a month. So a month goes by, they're not any better. 2 months goes by, they're not any better. The third month comes around and they actually start feeling worse. And then they say, well, I can't cope with this anymore. I'm going to get back on the drug and then it's going to go away. They get back on the drug and it doesn't go away. And generally what happens to these people is they're just like, well, what the hell has happened to me? Do I have multiple sclerosis? Have I developed some kind of neurological condition? The doctor doesn't recognize it. The doctor's been told that it's, mild and should go away. And they essentially end up in this weird like limbo where no one knows what's going on. But really what's happened is they've had a very bad reaction to the withdrawal. That kind of the brain zaps and the dizziness and the severe anxiety has just sensitized the nervous system. And then they essentially just have to ride it out. And this is what I treat in my clinic now. Most of my patients have had neurological harm from coming off the medications. And we're doing like neuro rehab over like a couple of years for them to recover. And they do. It has like a good prognosis. But the way that you can avoid this is essentially by tapering people without severe withdrawal symptoms. And there's been huge acknowledgement in this space recently. We finally had the American Society of Addiction Medicine in their recent guideline this year acknowledge protracted withdrawal from benzodiazepine medications. They say in their guidelines that gradual tapers reduces the chance of developing this kind of neurological injury. And so it's more recognized now. And but the issue is like many people can actually stop these drugs suddenly and they'll be okay, even with severe withdrawal. I'd say that's probably the majority, but you cannot predict the people who will go on to develop protracted withdrawal, this neurological injury. And so for me personally, because you can't predict that, I think the safest way is to taper everyone slowly now, because it can be such a disabling condition. And so that's like the other piece of the puzzle. I'm learning that the drugs don't really work. I'm learning that there's a small but growing group of people who are having all of these issues that you could just avoid if you bring them down safely. On top of that, it's just a lot more comfortable. Many people, when they come off the medications too quickly, they just develop severe withdrawal and they say, oh, this is too hard. I give up. I don't want to do this anymore. or the doctor starts saying, well, it's your underlying condition, you just need to stay on the drug. And it's like, no, you just had bad withdrawal. You need to taper slower. It is possible if you just do it gradually and in the right way. Um, and so that's what I do now. I try and help people find a safe off ramp off the drugs without getting hurt.
Let's talk about that. So a lot of people listening to this are going to either be on a sleeping medication and they want to come off, and there's some confusion about how. I know that most doctors recommend, slow, coming off slow, but a lot of doctors I feel like don't have the training or the knowledge. They don't, that you have. They haven't done the research. They haven't been exposed to what you've been exposed to. And so I would love for you to give us some insight on, let's say I'm on benzodiazepine. I've been taking it for longer than let's say a year. And now it used to help me sleep. It's not helping me sleep anymore. I want to come off of it. It's not even helping me at this point. What would you recommend someone in that situation, how to, I guess let's talk about it from how to think about it, how to think about coming off of it. And are there strategies that you've seen at the Taper Clinic helping hundreds of people come off these medications that just people, if they knew this information, it would really help that plane land a lot smoother?
Sure. Yeah. So, well, let me say three things. So these are the three things that I think um, can really increase the chance of success with a taper. So the first one is I recommend that you start with a 5 to 10% reduction in your dose. And so this might be, using a pill cutter to just like cut off some of the medication. Um, and and so that's usually enough of a reduction where you're going to induce receptor change, which is what you want. You want less of the drug, mild withdrawal symptoms. Those withdrawal symptoms trigger the receptors to normalize again. And it's not too much. So 5 to 10% is usually a decent chunk to remove. And then you want to wait, I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks for the withdrawal symptoms to go away. That's usually a good amount of time for the brain to adapt. Sometimes it's a bit longer, but I wouldn't ever do a reduction faster than every 2 weeks. And
Okay.
so you might do it every 2 to 6 weeks, somewhere in that range. And then it's a process of readjusting. And so the next thing that I would say, point number two, um, is to not follow any kind of schedule or any sort of advice that the doctor gives you about reduction frequency. Your goal is to listen to your own body. And that is that your brain and the speed at which your brain adapts to the removal should be the only North Star that you follow. And so let's say I do a 10% reduction on Xanax, and within 4 weeks I'm fine. I'm going to look back at that and I'm going to say, well, that was like nothing. Maybe I can do a 12.5% reduction. And then I do that. And then 4 weeks later, I go, well, that was really nothing. Maybe I can do a 15% reduction. And I do that. I go, okay, I felt that one, but that was okay. I'm going to stay at this 15% reduction now. And you might do that for a couple more weeks. And what happens usually is as you get lower, you need to do smaller reductions. So maybe 4 months later, you do it and you go, you know what? I'm really not doing well. You wait a couple days. I'm going to go back up to the previous dose I was on. I'm going to wait for things to settle. And now I'm just going to do a 10% reduction because I don't need this. And so you can play around with the amount that you reduce and the timing, but it should be guided by you and your brain. If you only need 2 weeks between reductions to fully normalize, just taper every 2 weeks. If you need 6 weeks, taper every 6 weeks. And so I often find that like the first 6 months of a taper is just kind of fine tuning what kind of person am I? Am I someone with a very elastic brain and I can actually accommodate with reductions pretty well? Or am I someone who takes a bit more time? And that's okay as well. But that's what you need to find out. Now, the last thing, and this is the area where most people fail their tapers, is when you get to the lower dose range. Now, there's something at the lower dose range. Um, many people need to do very, very small reductions to come off the drug without severe withdrawal. Much smaller than the reductions you can do when you have more drug. And the way I want to explain this is, imagine my fists right here together. That there's between them, there are the receptors for the drug, and in that space, it's just flooded with benzodiazepine or some other drug. You're on a high dose of it, and there's just all of this drug floating around between them. If you're at a really high dose of the drug and you remove a quarter of it, because you're at a high dose already, there's like residual drug in there. And so you could remove a quarter of it, and then all the residual drug just kind of latches back onto those receptors. And you might not even notice much withdrawal. You might do that again down to, lower at 50%. There's still enough residual that you hardly notice any withdrawal, and so on and so forth. But here's the thing, when you get to the lower doses of the drug, and by that I mean, it's usually the first dose you were ever put on the drug. It's like the starting dose. That's
Okay.
usually where these problems take place. There's not a lot of residual anymore. And so if you all of a sudden do, maybe you're dropping by, 0.25 of Xanax, and you're like, oh, well, I've dropped 0.25 of Xanax all the way down from, I was at 3 milligrams originally. I should be able to do that. If you're at like half a milligram of Xanax and you drop 0.25, very quickly, you're going to find out that the withdrawal is a lot more severe because there's not residual drug left over anymore. Like if you remove
Interesting.
that amount, there's no leftover drug that's going to jump in there and hit and grab onto those receptors. And so most people will fail the taper right at the lower dose range. And they'll say something like, well, I was doing the same reductions the whole way down and it was fine. Why isn't this working now? I guess I have to stay on it. But they're not understanding that this strange thing with the receptors and just the flooding of the drug in between. And so here's what you do to avoid that. What you do, and this works with all sedatives, all benzos, all Ambien and Sonata, metazapine, trazodone, all of them. Go to your doctor when you get to the lowest dose and have him turn it into a liquid. So just get that lowest dose and say, hey, doctor, can you send this to a compounding pharmacy? I want you to take whatever it is, half a milligram of Xanax or, half a milligram of Clonopin, 10 of Ambien, whatever it is. I want it to be 10 to 1 milliliter. I want you to say to the compounding pharmacist, please make a compounded liquid solution where 10 milligrams will equal to 1 ml. And if that's the dose, that's how you do it. Because what that means is now instead of taking like that, that tablet, that half a milligram tablet or that 10 milligram Ambien, what you're going to do is you're going to stick a syringe, a 1 milliliter syringe into that bottle, and you're going to draw it up. Now, most 1 milliliter syringes will have 100 little lines on the side of it to kind of that's just what syringes are like. They have all these little lines, and a 1 ml one should have 100. And so now instead of having this tiny little pill that it's like hard to cut with a pill cutter or a razor, which is really like fiddly, you've got these 100 little lines on the side of it, and you can just lower it down with an immense amount of precision, the type of precision you can only get by using a liquid and drawing it up into a syringe with all these little lines. And what that will allow you to do is that when you get to that lowest dose, you can just kind of, take one line less, one line less, one line less
Hmm.
as you go. And that will allow you to kind of safely step off that last amount without triggering severe withdrawal. And so if you do that, you will be ahead of 99% of people. Yes, there's nuances, there's other things going on, there's ways you can make it more technical. But big picture, 5 to 10% reductions every 2 to 4 weeks. Listen to your body, liquefy the drug right at the end if you're struggling to do smaller steps. If you do that, most people will be okay.
That's amazing. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for giving a clear explanation and kind of follow up question on that because I know people will ask that watch this or in the comments they'll ask if your doctor doesn't want to liquefy the last bit of medication. What do you suggest people? I mean, find another doctor. Is there a resource that you have? I mean, obviously they can reach out to you at the taper clinic and explore what the work that you do there. But is there what would you recommend? Let's say somebody goes to their doctor and the doctor's like, "No, I don't not doing that." Just find
Yeah.
another doctor,
I
or
would say,
have you had that experience with clients? Or I guess not because
yeah.
you're the one that's
But yeah, but they've told me about experiences with other doctors. And so, yes, find another doctor. But usually the reason why doctors are hesitant to do this is because they've never done it before. And they're like, oh, I'm coming in here. I'm the family medicine doctor. We've got, 7 minutes of FaceTime. And now you're asking me to do this complicated thing. And so, yes, you could find another doctor, but what I would say is if you can go in with the script written out, which is crazy I know to be like, okay, you know medical training, write the script out. Just something that's really easy for them to understand. Just say, hey, I'm at this dose. I'm really struggling to come off of it, and I want it to be liquefied by a compounder. Um, can you here's the script I would like you to send. And so if you could just say, I take a milligram a day, I need that milligram turned into 1 ml. Usually I get 30 tablets, but now I need to get 30 milliliters dispensed for a 30-day supply. And oh, by the way, I've even found you a compounding pharmacy. You don't even have to look for that. I've done the research in my local area. And so this is exactly where you need to send it. And so this is what it looks like. This is where you need to send it. If the doctor can do it in like a minute or two, um, they're more likely to say yes. If you make, I'm sorry to say this, but if you make it kind of complicated for them, you will run into resistance. They will say, well, this is just, this is BS. You don't need to do it. Make it simple for them and it will happen. If you want really in-depth information on this, I'll send this to you later, Devin. We publish all of our clinical trainings online. And so we've got, we're a team of 16 at the Taper Clinic. All of the trainings that we use to get them up to speed to do this work, they're published online for free. And
wow.
there's a section in this training. It's like a 5-hour training, but there's a section in there specifically on how to write prescriptions out. And I'm going to send that to you, Devin, and you can share it in the show notes for this episode. And so if they want, a full 10-minute presentation by me on how to exactly write out prescriptions the way I would train my clinical staff to do it, they can do that as well. But what I would say is just ask the doctor first. If you need something extra, dig into the training, and it'll show you exactly how to do it.
Thank you so much for that gift. That's so helpful for so many people that are going to be listening to this. Um, Really clear steps too. Makes perfect sense. I'm curious, what do you see are some of the biggest mistakes people make, Joseph, when they're trying to come off these medications themselves without having support of, someone like yourself and your team at the Taper Clinic, or a doctor that actually does care and has some interest in helping people get off medications versus keeping them on. What are some of the things that you see the biggest mistakes that people
Mhm.
make?
So they rush it and they say, "I'm just going to white knuckle it because all of this sounds too complicated." And what's the worst that could happen? That's probably the biggest one, because people can get really hurt that way. Not everyone, most people are okay, but if it happens to you, it's really bad. Um, they don't stop using stimulants. They still want to drink caffeine or take their ADHD medications, and so that's that's not good either. Um, and let me see. Whew, other big mistakes. Yeah, like I had mentioned, not liquefying the lowest portion of the drug. That's a real killer. Um, I'd say those are the main ones, Devin.
Okay. So, I know I want to be mindful of our time here. I mean, I have a million more questions, but I'm gonna be pretty specific with these last few. The side effects that people experience when they're coming off these medications, whether it's a benzo or whether it's, something else. How do you guys help people manage the side effects? Because that's a real, no matter how slow you come off, I think that there could be, let's just say, some side effects. So are there any strategies or any insight that you could share with the listeners around how best to address those common side effects when someone is making that journey to come completely off of medication?
Yeah, yeah. So the first thing is just make sure that it is um, that you're not tapering too quickly. And so, if you do a reduction and then all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of withdrawal symptoms and insomnia and brain zaps and anxiety, you may be tapering too quickly. Go up to the last dose and do smaller reductions. So there's that. But sometimes um, there's just this adapting to coming off the medication, and there will be higher anxiety. You will be having to learn new skills. And I would just say reassurance is probably the most important thing. You just to know that hundreds of thousands of people have come off these medications, and that the brain will naturally rebalance itself. It always does. You will eventually be able to sleep again naturally. It just takes time, and to not panic, and that it can just take time. It's normal. It's par for the course. The anxiety about the withdrawal and the symptoms can make it so much worse. And so to just let go of that, and just let it be something that is just happening. And then so long as you're doing it safely and you're coming down with the appropriate steps, nothing bad is going to happen to you.
Mm,
It's just your brain adapting. It's a normal process, and just give it time. I mean, so that would be my overall message.
appreciate it. That's some really good insight there. Last question, then we'll wrap up here. And I'm so grateful for this conversation. It's going to truly serve so many people. What would you say the biggest predictors of success are for someone who's going through a tapering process? So, of the hundreds of people that you've helped taper off medication, what do you see as those predictors of success for someone? Is it a mindset? Is it a personality? Is it something physiologically that someone's showing up with? They have a more bouncy brain, or I'd love to know just for people and just my own curiosity. Is there anything that stands out for you?
Um, so what I would say, let me think the major ones. So the major folks that I've struggled to help have usually been people with addiction, and I want to go a layer deeper than that. So the mentality of kind of being addicted to a drug is usually you have severe pain in your life, severe ongoing pain, whether it's a lack of meaning, uh, relationship problems, and something like that. And the pain it's so immense that it's essentially driving you to use higher and higher amounts of the drug. And so you need to have some control and some understanding over the pain in your life. Many addicts that I work with, they're on so many medications, um, and their life is in such disarray. Whether it's from the drugs, that they don't even really have a good understanding of the problems happening in their life, and it's just controlling them completely.
Mm,
And so I'd say like a good insight into the problems in your life, how they've led to the situation, and also strategies in place to manage them. um, I think that will help people immensely. And so, okay, and now so let's deal with those people who maybe they're just dependent on the medication. Yes, I have insomnia and I have anxiety, and there's a few things I can tweak in my lifestyle. I understand that. So what about those people? I would say just um, self motivation. You're not there because your spouse is saying, "Hey, you need to get off these medications. Your memory's shot to pieces." It has to come from you. You have to. I think people who come in and they're just like, I don't want this for myself. Deep down, I know that there's something not wrong with me. I don't want to be dependent on this. I don't want to be in the nursing home when I'm 80 and I'm not able, someone makes a mistake with the medications and I don't have the wherewithal to fix it. I don't want that for myself. And I'm willing to put in the work right now to do it. An openness to trying new things as well. is really important. Um, and so I would say, yeah, self driven motivation to try new things, a life that's relatively in order. Um, I think if you can do those things, I mean, the success rate is really high. Like it's over 90% for me. Like when I work with patients like that, not just for insomnia, but anxiety, depression, and these other issues, if you can get those things in place, and if they have a supportive family behind them as well, I mean, the chance of success, it's 90% plus. Um, it's really good odds.
Amazing. I love to hear that. As we wrap up this important and eye-opening conversation, like this, I just want to give you is there any other last minute insight or tips that you'd like to share with our listeners? Again, with the thought in mind that these are people that are on a sleeping medication, they're coming off or they want to come off. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap up this conversation?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I want to say, and I get the most hate from this from most people, it's crazy because I'm always going after antidepressants and stuff. Um, I would be really careful about caffeine and also nicotine and cannabis. I know in our world right now, these are legalized and they're considered to be safe. For things like caffeine, yeah, if you want to have a cup of coffee in the morning, that's not an issue. But if you're at the point where you're drinking like a pot of coffee a day or like multiple diet cokes and all of that, that's a problem. The cannabis these days is really, really strong. It's correlated with higher rates of suicide. It can also cause all sorts of anxiety and depression issues. And so treat your body like a temple. And I think there's tremendous power in just returning to the natural state of just eating good food, moving your body, and avoiding drugs, legal and illegal. And yeah, so that's what I would say. Keep an open mind. Try to come off those things. You may be surprised about how much better you feel.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge. This conversation, I learned a lot. It's going to serve so many people. I know the people that are going to listen to this, that are going to watch this, are going to be so grateful for you, for how you have shown up in the world, for the work that you're doing, and just for being so open and generous with the information that you're sharing. I know. So, for our listeners, there is an incredible YouTube channel with so much more information, great information. Is it Taper Clinic on YouTube? Joseph,
So
is that
it's Doctor Josef. So it's and then it's Josef. It's the German spelling. And yeah, we're on YouTube. We're on all social media platforms, just under Doctor Josef, Josef. And our website is taperclinic.com. And I think we're in like 15 states or 16 states. We've got coverage for about 70% of the US population. We're in the largest states. And so if you are interested in more comprehensive tapering experience with professionals, you can learn about us over there.
amazing? Thank you so much for the conversation. So great to connect with you. And again, I just want to just acknowledge you for the work that you're doing because it's very important work and it's serving a lot of people and it'll continue to. I think this, the future is with voices like yourself and others, the conversation I think will shift eventually. So we got to keep getting you out there. I know you've been hitting the road and spreading this message. So again, thank you so much. And for those listening, you know where to find them. Take care.
Okay. Thanks, Devin.
Now, if you're ready to take the next step towards better sleep and want expert guidance, my team and I are here to help. You can book a free sleep consultation to learn more about how our proven approach can work for you. All you need to do is visit sleepscienceacademy.com to get started. And if you're passionate about sleep health and you want to help others overcome their insomnia, you can also check out our sleep coach certification program, where you'll gain all the tools and the training you need to guide clients to better sleep and transform their lives. So whether you're looking to reclaim your nights or make an impact as a sleep coach, it starts with one step. That's visit sleepscienceacademy.com to learn more. Thanks again for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next one.